to talk about the Virginia Enterprise Zone program, and a caveat before we get into this. Of course, not every community in Virginia has an enterprise zone, and unfortunately, we are at our maximum capacity for enterprise zones around the state. But we wanted to talk about enterprise zone number one because it is a part of the suite of resources that we have in our agency for economic development. And it is one that can be, again, layered and leveraged with these other resources. But I think especially when you hear from our speaker here in a minute, you'll really hear how localities can think in terms of incentives and what localities can do to incentivize developers and think about who they are as a community and what their needs are and what those local tools are that they can bring to the table. So the Virginia Enterprise Zone program you see mostly across the southwestern, southern portion of the state up into the eastern portion, with a few localities in the central Shenandoah Valley and then northern Virginia in Winchester. So that is what our Enterprise Zone map looks like. And this is a grant program that incentivizes job creation and real property investment. And of course, there are different thresholds that zone investors need to meet. But right now, the applications are open for those zone investors who have created jobs in 2021 or have made real property investments that completed and received their placed in service documentation in 2021, then they apply for those grants in 2022. So it's a performance-based grant. And the real property investment grant, much like the IRF grant, can be mixed use, but has to be at least 30% commercial, can also be industrial in nature. And the applicant is the entity that capitalizes on the investment or deducts the investment as a business expense under federal treasury regulations for tax purposes. Not a sentence I get to say often enough in my life. And we, of course, look at qualified real property investments that are primarily those hard construction costs is what qualifies towards reaching those thresholds for the real property investment grant. Eligibility, again, this is performance-based. So if you receive your final placed in service documentation for the state program, say in 2022, then you would apply in 2023. So these are investments that have already been made, already been completed, and then we are using the enterprise zone grants and incentives to reward those projects for taking place within the zone. Okay, let's see. So with those different thresholds, new construction, they have to meet a threshold of 500,000. Rehab or expansion has to meet a threshold of 100,000. If you have a solar component, that drops the threshold for the investment by $50,000. And the job creation grant, similar to the real property investment grant, is performance-based. So again, jobs that were created in 2021 are now applying for that grant in 2022. And those need to be full-time jobs. There are wage threshold requirements. They need to also be offering to pay at least 50% of the healthcare insurance premiums for the employees. So these are high wage jobs that are being incentivized in localities that reach certain metrics of distress. Again, it's based on the wage rate, up to $500 per year if they are making 175% of federal minimum wage, $800 per year if they are offering 200% of federal minimum wage with health benefits. And over the next couple of years, you're going to see that shift a little bit as Virginia minimum wage is scheduled to outpace federal minimum wage. So those figures are going to be changing a bit. The local incentives is really what we're going to be talking about today. And the Enterprise Zone program is a partnership between those state programs that we just talked about and the local governments who have to have their own incentives to pair with the state incentives. Local incentives are really the critical components of the Enterprise Zone program because they provide the locality with the opportunity to tailor the assistance to the direct needs of the business community. So where the state Enterprise Zone program looks at certain kind of jobs, a local Enterprise Zone incentive may prioritize different kinds of jobs based on their local needs. Local incentives should take into account their local and regional adopted economic development priorities and strategies. So again, even if your locality doesn't have an Enterprise Zone program, we're going to hear about some things that your locality may be able to take on to incentivize economic development. So some examples of local incentives are waiving building permit or zoning permit fees, real estate tax exemptions, grants on machinery and tools tax, facade improvement grants, utility connection fee waivers, rebating B-pole taxes or fees, and then having workforce training components as well. And now we are going to hear from Mallory Butler in Newport News about how that locality utilizes their zones, both with the state grants, but most particularly for our purposes today, how they have determined their local incentives and how they utilize those programs. And Mallory has nearly 35 years, that is impossible to believe, of experience at local and regional levels. She is a seasoned economic development professional with a broad base of experience. And I know that at the state level for the Enterprise Zone program, we love to tap into Mallory as a resource for all of the experience she has with this program in economic development. So Mallory, I am going to hand it over to you. And Mallory is actually going to share her own screen. Mallory, it is the selection there next to the little hand at the bottom of the screen. It's a box with an arrow in it, is present now. And you'll want to unmute yourself before you start presenting.
Unmuted. Now we're going to try. Let me hit entire screen, and then now I can change my screen, and you all tell me if and when you see anything. Nope.
Not yet. Did you select the present now option?
Share your entire screen. Share. All right. All right.
Yeah, there you go. It's kicked in.
All right, so there we go. Good morning. Nice to be with you all today. And there's nothing like talking about a program that is presently closed and unavailable until new zone opportunities come about in 2029. However, as Rebecca shared, what I'm going to bring to the table and share today, I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with the program, some of the impact and results from it, but more importantly, talk about the lessons learned and things that from the program that can be applied even if you don't have a zone, or if you do have a zone, to enhance the zone that you have. So let's see. So again, I'm going to share my experience with the program, the results, as well as my lessons learned. As Rebecca said, I've been around the block a while. I started marketing the Enterprise Zone program shortly after it was codified by the General Assembly. At the time, I was with a regional group that represented 5 cities, and among those 5 cities, they held 7 of what were then the 25 or so urban Enterprise Zone programs. When the program was initially established, it was dedicated solely to urban communities. It has broadened and expanded over the years to some 50-some zones now. More specifically, in addition to marketing enterprise zones for the bulk of my career, I've also served as a local enterprise zone administrator since 2009, starting in Portsmouth when I renewed that city's first zone, VEZ number 4, and then when I won that city's second zone, VEZ 20. For the last 5 years, I've been with the city of Newport News, and I inherited one of the state's top performing enterprise zone programs. Newport News, like Portsmouth and Norfolk, was one of the first communities to receive a zone. At one point, they had 3 zones because the city is very, very urban. Over the years, they now have 2 zones that cover nearly every urban, industrial, and commercial district in the city. And it is outside of Richmond. It vies with Hampton for the spot of number 2 for the most active state enterprise zone users. Why am I involved in the enterprise zone program? Why do I administer it? Because it is one of the best ways in the Commonwealth to promote economic development and revitalization in areas that are or at one time were economically distressed and now may not be so distressed because of the success of the program. And as you've heard from Rebecca, this is accomplished through the state's incentivizing job creation and real property investment, and then our local incentives, which I'll talk a little bit about, reinforce job creation and capital investment, and can often be at different tiers or thresholds from the state. Stacking all morning. Again, when combined with other programs that are available for businesses, be them state or federal or local, it can be one of the best ways to obtain and leverage private investment. And just talking about those stacking and layerings, the earlier example of the brewery, a whole nother program that breweries or anybody in the food production business in Virginia can utilize is an APHID grant from the Department of Agriculture. And we've had some success with a distillery in Newport News that took advantage of that. So again, you know, it's a buffet of state incentives out there through a variety of state agencies to help communities and businesses succeed and thrive. So real quick, kind of a summary of similar to some of the earlier slides for some of the other programs. What are the impacts? What are the results of Newport News' Enterprise Zone program? Well, straight off of our 2020 annual report, we had 12 real property grants. We had 5 job creation grants, 7 business professional occupational license fee refunds, 7 commercial rehab tax abatement programs, and 22 facade improvement grants. And one of the things we've also been talking this morning about the need to educate our constituents, educate our elected leaders, educate our recipients of these grants. If you look at what these grants total for each of these categories, and you look at, for example, the real property investment grant, and you see that, you know, through the state, 12 property owners in Newport News last grant year received over $650,000 in incentives. Well, that was as a result of $422 million in capital investment in real estate. That means for every grant dollar the state issued in Newport News, the city was the beneficiary of $641 in new capital investment. That's a pretty good return on your investment. And that's what our General Assembly members and our council members and our constituents need to hear, that we're not throwing money at folks and not getting anything in return. These are pay for performance programs, and Virginia and the localities are receiving the benefit if they can award $1 in a grant and get $641 in return. That's better than I think the stock market's done on some of its best days. Again, we created our over 1,000 jobs were created, and they received over 300,000 in grants. We'll talk a little bit more about the BPOL refund and the commercial rehab and the facade improvement grants, but these are local incentives that we put together that meet the state's requirement for the enterprise zone program to say that we have local incentives offered in our enterprise zone. Nearly all of these, candidly, are offered citywide. It's just the threshold is either less or the benefit is more if it's in the enterprise zone. And so let's talk for a few minutes about that. The other piece I'll share is we use these local enterprise zone incentives often as the local match EP and the governor's office put forth for a business. So that's another benefit. So what are the lessons learned? And then we'll talk about what other communities can do even if they don't have an enterprise zone. Well, as we've talked about other programs, marketing, promotion, and access to information about the program and the incentive is key, whether it's an enterprise zone program we're talking about or whether it's an incentive that is citywide. So we have developed a very easy, user-friendly, interactive website, and I'll share an example of that with you in a moment, that puts the information out there. We've all learned the internet is the first source for everybody, from site selection consultants to entrepreneurs and everybody in between. So we must have easily accessible websites and information. We need to have it downloadable. We need to have it reader-friendly. We need to have all the questions answered. Not that we don't want to have a one-on-one opportunity to discuss the program, but we don't want to miss out and be eliminated because a site selector or an entrepreneur couldn't find the information about it on Newport News's website, so they skipped Newport News and went on to another community. So that's a big lesson learned that I think is applicable to everything that we do in trying to improve our communities. We also actively promote the state how to qualify and how to apply workshops and webinars. There are 2 of those coming up tomorrow and 2 next week. We blasted those out in our citywide electronic daily newsletter last Thursday, and we blasted it through our Constant Contact. So the entire community, some 10,000 people that get that e-newsletter every day, received information about it, as well as our tailored 2,000 person list that receives our Constant Contact that are the business community members. How do we personally reach out to potential recipients of the state and local incentives? We do, aside from those broadcast emails, we do direct mail and direct emails. We mine data from our Commissioner of Revenue's business poll, business license list, from our building officials list of COs, from our building officials list of building permits issued. We buy once a year one of the quarterly reports from the Virginia Employment Commission, their SES 202 file, and we mine that information for anybody who on average has increased their employment level over the last year by a minimum of 4 jobs. We also, throughout the year, talk to people, and then we personally go back and reach out to them when the state deadlines for the RPIG and the Job Creation Grant come about, and we make sure they know when those workshops and webinars and deadlines are. But that's information that we need to have out there, and that's communication we need to be having with our. We said, okay, there are no, the enterprise zone program is currently closed. We're maxed out with the maximum number of zones the state can have, and it's going to be several more years before one comes up. So what does this mean to the other communities that do not have a zone right now? Well, here an example of a couple of the enterprise zone incentives Newport News has that can be made available citywide. Remember, if you have an economic development authority or an industrial development authority, they have the ability to offer grants. And we utilize our IDA and EDA every month to approve various grants that may or may not be confined to the enterprise zone. We have a commercial rehabilitation tax abatement program that our city council has approved and is in city code. And we work closely with our real estate assessor to have companies take advantage of that. We also have the ability through our enterprise zone program, as well as through our tourism zone program, as well as through a couple of the other zones that we have obtained over time, the ability to offer a grant that is essentially equal to a percentage refund of a business license. We also offer an e-commerce grant where we will, for certain small businesses, pay 50% of the cost up to a threshold for updating or obtaining a website. There's so much business that has been transpiring over the internet, and it's only been enhanced by, sadly, the COVID. And we're all learning that that is the first place, again, that consumers and businesses go to seek information. So our local businesses, our small businesses, need to have a customer-friendly, information-filled website. We also offer a facade improvement grant. That is a citywide program offered through our EDA. It is available in the enterprise zone. And if it's in the enterprise zone, the threshold for investment is less and the benefit is slightly more. So again, you can have these citywide incentives. And if you do have a zone, you just tweak it so that the enterprise zone business or property owner receives a little bit more or can qualify a little bit easier. When I was in Portsmouth, a colleague initiated what was called an interior build-out grant. You all may know Toy Hunter. She's with the Hampton Roads Alliance now, used to be with VEDP. Well, she developed a program. It's very similar to most facade improvement grants from the standpoint, except that it's for the interior of the property. So this means helping a property owner who has vacant storefront space create a vanilla shell so that they can then bring a tenant in and provide TI. And that was a matching grant program. And I would encourage folks to look at that and layer it with some of these other programs that are looking at how to fill vacant storefronts in a confined area, either through the CBL program or through the Main Street program. That's another opportunity. I'd like to share with you, if I may, a view of our website. Let me see if it's going to open up here. Where do I go back? Let's see if I can get here. Here we go. So about a year ago, we completely redid, with a lot of support from our agency and our GIS department, our enterprise zone website. And it opens up here with the key, and you can see that there is a map of the city. Newport News runs parallel to the James River along the Virginia Peninsula. We have two zones. We have the Zone 31 is the green area, and Zone 3 is the orange area. We have a little introduction there. We then go down and have information on each of the zones with a short overview. We go further down and we have information on our local incentives. And we have information on those citywide incentives that have either greater benefits or lower thresholds if the business or property is located in the enterprise zone. All of this information is available in downloadable PDFs. We have a nice map here that is a copy of what is on the interactive map on the website, and it includes a brief description of each of the submarkets in that geography. We also have a single page downloadable PDF with, again, all the information on the state incentives and all the information on the local incentives. So I'll just continue with the theme here of you have to market and promote these sites. You have to, these incentives, this information, these benefits to these businesses. It has to be easily accessible. And many of these local incentives that are codified as enterprise zone incentives are in fact programs that your EDA could offer citywide. So with that, Rebecca, have I left anything out?
That was a fantastic overview of how Newport News utilizes the state and local incentives, and I'm so appreciative of the information on how localities without zones can also leverage these kinds of activities and incentives for impacts in their communities as well. Mallory, thank you.